Welcome to the Witz podcast. We're here on episode 7, here with Eli and Eric from Speaker Labs. Today's episode is going to be a lot around things like public speaking and dealing with fears and entrepreneurialism. I want to hear who you guys are in a second, and for the rest of the audience, you could tell them who you are. But before we get into that, I'm excited about today's conversation because we've wanted to have you here for a while. I don't think I've met two better dudes that do what they do in your realm. So I'm glad that we're able to talk. And really what we want to do is, get as much as we can from you two today. So on that note, why don't we hand it over to you, and for the audience, tell us who you are and what you guys do.
Cool.
Awesome. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, that's high praise.
Yeah, unbelievable.
Yeah,
unbelievable.
thanks for that.
Never had an intro like that.
Yeah.
I'm Eric. I'm one of the co-founders of Speaker Labs.
I'm Eli, other co-founder.
And we make people awesome public speakers. That's
Yes,
what we
you
do.
do.
It doesn't get tighter than that. We make people awesome public speakers.
Yeah. And public speaking is a really hard thing to do. I mean, everyone in some cases wants to be up in front of the room. But boy, what a place of pressure.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny you say it's a hard thing to do, because our perspective on whether or not public speaking is a hard thing to do is that it's actually the easiest thing to do, but it feels like the hardest thing to do. And so that's what we get to sort of switch people's minds about, because it feels impossible. But if you really break it down, what is public speaking? You're doing it every day. You're just not doing it with an audience. So we try to unlock the context of public speaking as an easy context, rather than anything that's actually hard, because we don't think it's that hard. It just feels really hard.
So tell us a little more about, so it kind of feels hard, it's not really hard. I mean, how many times you face that conversation, and how hard is it to sort of win that person over or to get them to shift that perception?
I mean, it's a very uphill battle, because perception tends to be a more dominant driver of how people view something than what actually is going on. And in actuality, public speaking is just communication. We've just shifted the context, and then people feel that it's a different skill, but it's still the same skill. It's just communication. And so we find it is an uphill battle, but it is one that you can actually get through to people on, especially when you get them to experience it. When you get people up to communicate in front of a group, they immediately constrain, they get restricted, they start worrying about judgment, what people are thinking about them. But when you start to get them to rationalize in their mind that it's the same exact skill that they've been practicing literally for every decade of their lives. Like, people come out of the womb crying. That's a form of body language.
Yeah, that's
right.
true
Like,
too.
communication is a human skill. Yeah. When you get them to rationalize in the moment that it's not a new skill, it's just a new context, it reminds them of how capable they are. And then people start to register a little bit more deeply that it isn't actually as challenging as their mind tells them that it is.
So where do you see people going wrong with this stuff? I mean, this sounds rational. I mean, it makes sense, but where do people go wrong with presenting, public speaking, communicating, just maybe in general?
Yeah. I mean, there's two sort of pieces to it. There's the content of what they're saying, and then there's the delivery. Starting with the delivery piece, people go wrong in just questioning their own capability. And then we ask them to name their favorite public speakers, and what is it about them that you love so much? Well, I love when Barack Obama uses silences. I love when Oprah is running around and yelling. And then we ask them, well, do you know how to use silence? Can you be silent? Can you yell? Have you ever yelled before? Have you ever walked around before? These are skills that we cannot teach you. You just got to start doing them in this context where it feels like you'd be judged if you do. The difference between good public speakers and bad has nothing to do with capability. It has to do with willingness to do what they can already do. It's just willingness.
It's part of why we actually like what we do, is we can't teach someone silence. Like, you're being silent right now. It's
hard for me, by the way.
Yeah, right? That is surprisingly hard for a lot of people. But we can't teach people these things, and that's part of what makes our job fun, is that we don't have to teach people something new. We have to get people to use something established in a different context. It's so much easier and more fun than if we had to take something that's complicated and intricate and dynamic and try to get people to understand something that they didn't prior understand.
Yeah. So how, when you're working with people around public speaking and presentation skills, how much of a divide do you find that people are coming to work on things like technical presentations with you versus they have to stand up in front of a board and give a talk, or they're at that holiday party and they want to close out the year?
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of all of the above. I know it's a bit of an annoying answer, but we have salespeople who want to be better in a boardroom or on a phone call. We've got tech leaders who want to teach technical skills. We've got people who are pitching their new business idea to investors. We even have people who don't really public speak but want to take a public speaking course, because when you can master like the hardest form of communication, the others become a little bit easier. And a lot of people view public speaking as a hard form of communication. So we train a lot of people who don't even public speak, but they just want to be better communicators, and that's the access point.
Yeah, I think I remember this was a long time ago. There was maybe it was an article or quote or in quotations, a study where they said, would you rather get hit by a bus or stand up and present? And the majority of people picked hit by a bus. Now, obviously, it's very easy to pick that.
Really rational thinking, right?
Right, and back to your point, I mean, the brain will say, no, I'll get hit by a bus, because that's never going to happen. But that fear of standing up in front of people and presenting, that's so real for people. You guys use a great line, which is the tigers, right? Tell us about the tigers.
One of the things that exists pretty predominantly for most people is a fear of public speaking. And the reason is because ultimately we're afraid of other people. Because if we think back tens of thousands of years to the tribal times, human beings needed to have a heightened sense of awareness of what their tribes thought of them. Because if they didn't, they might end up losing rank in the tribe and ultimately getting exiled. And back in tribal times, exile meant death. It meant you were going to come face to face with a tiger that was ultimately going to maul you and kill you. And back then, I mean, we use the term public speaking today, but tribes tens of thousands of years ago had communication. And if you ever communicated things that your tribe wasn't aligned to, you would lose rank. And with enough loss of rank in your tribe, you'd get ostracized and you'd come face to face with a tiger or some other threat to your existence and you would die. And so coded into the human psyche, basically through our DNA, is a fear of other people, to the extent that when we get up to public speak, we stand up, we walk to the front of a room, and instead of looking out and seeing other human beings who are likely equally afraid as we are, in different shapes and sizes, but equally afraid, instead of seeing human beings who are afraid like us, we see a bunch of tigers who could kill us. And it's this mental paradigm that we like to provide for people, so that when they get to the front of the room, they look out and they remember that they are speaking to people. They aren't speaking to real threats to their existence, despite what it may feel like at a biological level.
Yeah, and that's what it's at that biological level that these things start to affect you.
Oh yeah, it's a human thing. It's not.
We experience it. Like we teach public speaking, but we have fear of public speaking. It's part of why we're interested to do it, is because we've had to deal with our own public speaking fears and realize that in changing our relationship to them, that actually helped us in our lives and our careers. And so it's part of what makes us want to do it, is we've experienced it and we want to help other people try to change their relationship to it.
I can tell you a little bit about how my relationship to public speaking fear changed, but are there any public speaking contexts that scare you? Or is it?
So I get nervous before every delivery. Always have, always will. Obviously, it's for me. It's like just that brief moment before you walk out in front of the room. Particularly when it's more of, call it like the keynote conference delivery versus like some of the coaching or the training that we do. Right. Obviously, the environment is different. The room is different. Or bigger. The stage is bigger. So all those things sort of pop in. But for me, I always leaned into the fear and the anxiety, right? For me, it was always just part of the natural course that you go through, right? How you develop that sort of resilience and that grit. But yeah, I've had my own moments of challenge with public speaking, particularly in the moment where you're in the midst of that delivery, your brain is going, I know this isn't going well. I know this is sort of going down the road it shouldn't be going. I'm trying to get it back on track. And the harder you squeeze and the harder you work, the more difficult it becomes, right? So there's what I've learned to do in those moments is take that breath, because sometimes you got to let go before you could get it back on track. So I don't know if I've answered your question, but yeah. So, but yeah, tell us about your public speaking sort of experience and or fears.
I had this crazy realization once about how easy public speaking is. I was someone who was, throughout most of my life in business school and all that, someone who was a pretty bad public speaker, pretty scared of it and constrained when I was on stage. If I had to give like a group presentation in business school or whatever it was, I'd be like the person who reads off the cue cards and speaks in a monotone. And then I was offered an opportunity to become a faculty member at the business school that I was at. And the very first class that I ever taught, I was terrified of it. It was a 3-hour lecture on finance and managerial accounting. I'm not good at that shit. And I knew, I was 22 at the time. I knew my students were going to be smarter than me. I knew it.
And probably older.
Yeah, some of them were. I was terrified. So I'm like, I over-prepared and I didn't sleep the night before. I didn't even start the class on time because I was too scared to start on time. I needed to psych myself up more. And then I don't know really what came over me, but I decided to start the class by screaming as loud as I possibly could. Good morning, everyone. I'm not going to do it now. I'll break your microphone. But I screamed and stepped forward and went nuts. Like picture like the Oprah giving away cars type of nuts. And nothing's ever been the same since. I realized that like, oh my God, you can just scream your fear away. And I could have been doing this all along. I didn't just get any new superpowers. I just decided to make a different decision. And that moment was completely transformational for me. And I think that's part of the reason why, at least and Eli can speak to his reasons, but at least one of the reasons why I wanted to start Speaker Labs and teach people public speaking, because I know for a fact that it's just a mindset shift because I experienced it. And I want to just have other people have that to realize just how easy public speaking is and how capable they are.
Well, you guys are good at it, and you know, not to blow smoke up your ears, but like we see a lot of programs. I mean, we're in the industry, you're in the industry. There's a lot of shit out there, and you know, you guys do it really well from the world of simplicity, which is, I think, what you just described right now. Let's stop trying to work things that aren't going to make a difference. Let's spend some real time helping people manage things like perceptions and fears and anxiety, and yes, things like tools for speaking and storytelling and putting your presentation. That's all part of it, but none of that matters if we just can't get past the fact that at the end of the day, it's a mindset shift that we have to go through. And that's really, I think, in a lot of cases, not the answer to all, but like it's the same sort of lesson we can take out through running a business. Right? I mean, you guys are entrepreneurs. I remember meeting you, what was it, maybe 2-3 years ago, maybe longer?
It was about 3 years ago. Yeah. It was probably like winter of 2016.
Yeah, and just starting on your entrepreneurial adventure, right? So on that, let's talk a little bit about that. What have been some of your fears as the entrepreneurs that you've maybe gotten over or managed, or the trials and tribulations of running a business where you teach people how to speak?
I mean, so there's plenty of them. I mean, one of them is the fear of even starting the business in the first place. Yeah. We were both teaching when Eric was alluding to being a faculty member. We were both teaching. And at the time, I remember there was one day we had just gone out with a bunch of friends, and he was driving me home. And when he was dropping me off, we were sitting in my driveway. We were just chatting a little bit about life and careers and stuff and how we weren't going to stay in academia forever. And this was 2012. And we came up with the idea in the driveway of, you know what we should do? We should teach teachers how to communicate better. Because what we found is that when we were in academia, there was a ton of faculty members who were solely focused on research and not focused on the actual education. And so in 2012, we had the idea to start a communication training company. And then 4 years went by where I don't think we acquired significant new skills or experience that made Speaker Labs work. But we basically just spent 4 years grappling with our fear of starting our own thing and taking on the potential for failure. So that was the first real big exposure to fear when it comes to entrepreneurship. But the other one was, once we decided we were going to spin up Speaker Labs and actually roll with it, it was 2016. You know, it was a time when a lot of companies were starting to invest in artificial intelligence and machine learning. And like we're talking an age of tech proliferation. Yeah. And here we're sitting going like, all right, why don't we start a company where we teach people how to talk good? You know, and we sort of looked at each other and we're like, so this seems to align with our interests. It seems to align with things that have helped us in our career. And it's something that we think we could be successful at, but is the market really at a place where this type of company, it's a good time to start a company like this? And so we were terrified of that too.
I mean, everyone in our lives thought like, what kind of millennial starts a teaching company? You should be starting an app or something like that, right?
Yeah. We had this this preconception about what entrepreneurs were in 2016, and it wasn't start a training company. But we did, and so that was another fear. We had a lot of apprehension around that. And then I'll go into one more, and then you can share your 2 cents too. But another big one is we're best friends, and there was a huge fear around starting a company like with each other, because we wanted to make sure that we always put friendship first. But at the same time, when you get into the car with a person and you're now driving that car together, you have a lot of opinions and a lot of emotional attachment to the way things go. And we were very aware that it was going to bring up arguments and battles and disagreements that we were going to have to navigate. And so there was a big fear around how are we going to make sure that we can stay as close as we are as friends while also building this business. And that was a tough one. But it's funny, we run a communication training company, and I would say the biggest thing that helped us navigate that one was good communication.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was a big fear too.
In fact, I want to ask a question, but before I do so, go
No,
ahead.
chime in if you got one.
Yeah, I echo all of Eli's thoughts. I think he basically nailed it. The only other thing that I would add is that back in, he said that in 2012 we had the idea, but we didn't do anything about it till 2016. What happened was the fear changed. Originally, we had a fear in 2012 of starting a business and failing. And then by 2016, the fear changed to a fear of never trying to be an entrepreneur. And when the fear of never being an entrepreneur started outweighing the fear of being an entrepreneur and failing, that's when we decided to do it. So it's all fear related. It's just the fear changed.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really interesting what you just said, which is, how motivating different fears can be to actually get you to take the action that you weren't taking before, right? Fear of failing versus fear of not starting, right? Fear of hurting the relationship, but fear of also not letting that relationship flourish to where it needs to go. So, we're on entrepreneurship and let's just go there. You guys are partners. I mean, you look at that couple that's been married for 30, 40 years and you say, what's the secret, right? And I have a number of clients that I coach that are in partnerships, and I know the types of conversations that I have with them where they have struggles with their partners. But what do you guys seem to not have it right, but you seem to be a really good symbiotic pair that seems to, I would imagine, flow with each other more than end up in conflict. So, I mean, yes, no, is that?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think it's two things mainly that allow our partnership to flourish and there's why it works in business and why it works as people. Why it works in business, I think, is because we have similar skills, but Eli has a much more intense orientation to thinking things through, and I have a much stronger attention to taking action. And if Eli was without me, he might just think the whole time and never do anything. And if I was without Eli, I might take horrible action that had no thought. So that sort of balance has worked really, really nicely. The other thing that's really important, Eli talked about our fears around starting a business with a best friend. And what we figured out there was that, and I'm sure this is true, as you mentioned, in marriages and all other relationships, the only reason we're good at it is because of radical honesty. Before we decided to partner together, we had really intense, hurtful conversations about why we were concerned about partnering together. And it was only through realizing that we could handle those conversations well that we realized, okay, we can probably do this. And we still work at it. We literally have a meeting once a month, every single month, 2 hours over lunch. We call it the intent lunch, where we just no business objectives whatsoever. Let's just talk about what we're doing well. Let's talk about how our partnership is going. Let's talk about what you did that pissed me off this month. Let's talk about vice versa. And let's get to the bottom of what our intent was. And that's what keeps it going. If you're not honest and you let it bottle up, I'm sure it doesn't work.
Yeah. I'd say it helps that we have similar interests and similar values and stuff. Even though our value hierarchies might be different in different ways, we have similar interests and similar values. But I think the most important thing is that we disagree effectively.
That I like, so disagreeing effectively. Wow. So
that's way more important, at least in my eyes, than agreeing on lots of things.
Yeah.
It's
or
more
agreeing
important
to disagree.
Yeah, or agreeing
right?
to disagree.
I mean, that's just
you've
a bunch
got to
of bullshit.
disagree intelligently.
Yeah. No, I like that. Disagreeing intelligently and disagreeing, did you say effectively? Yeah.
Disagreeing like an adult, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So what are some of the other things that you guys hold true as partners? I mean, what's the type of things that you remind yourselves as individuals to act or to demonstrate or to be in order to hold the partnership up?
I mean, we sort of view every disagreement as the lens through which we look at it. The lens through which we look at it as is don't be right, get it right. So that we're less committed to our opinion being the objective right thing, and we're more committed to figuring out the right thing. And I think that slight bias makes us a little bit less attached to our own viewpoint and a little bit more committed to figuring out what the best course of action is, even if it isn't our own subjective viewpoint. So that's sort of like a value that I think we ascribe to that helps us navigate things well. That's one that popped to my mind.
Yeah. The other thing is, this is a little like pie in the sky and feely, but I don't have a way to do this well, really, but we're really root cause oriented. So many disagreements in everyone's lives are just symptoms of deeper problems. So we always try to get as deep as we possibly can go. And usually when you get deep enough, you realize that on the foundational values you have, there's probably actually alignment. And then you can work backwards from there.
There's I think it's called Hanlon's razor. And it's basically, it's like an axiom or something, but basically I might even have the name wrong, but essentially what it says is never attribute to malice that can be which attributed to stupidity. Mm-hmm. And so if we ever do things that piss each other off, first and foremost, we attribute it to lack of thought, ignorance, stupidity, and never actual malice.
Really important for Eli to do with a partner like me.
Yeah. Well, you're the impulsive sort of wild action taking one, right? So
so I think like it's little ideas like that. But then another thing that just popped in my mind too is there's many work days where, let's say we're not working with clients and we're intending to do a bunch of research and try to enrich our own ideas, or we're trying to have some client meetings or something. What ends up happening is we find ourselves going down these rabbit holes, just like exploring ideas in life, just as friends. And I think by going to sort of like the mental gym as friends about every subject matter that can possibly come up under the sun, that allows us to navigate our differences effectively outside the context of our business. And then when we get into a difference of opinion or a difference of idea in the context of our business, we sort of have had those workouts at the mental gym of how to go at each other a little bit effectively.
As an example, I can think of a fun example that we had recently. We were talking about whether or not a coach like Scotty Bowman in hockey is the success factor with those Detroit Red Wings, or whether they would have won with any coach because he's so good, because the players were just so good, right? Was it the coach or was it the players? What was going on there? And we took different stances, and I was the person who said those players would have won anyways. Eli said it was the coaching, but we had
nice.
But it ended up with such an interesting conversation about leadership and about business, and so that's, I think, sort of what Eli means, where we're having a conversation just as friends, but it's the conduit to talking about some really cool things.
Yeah, awesome. We call it intention versus impact, right? Your intention might be pure, but your impact is something different. And back to where sometimes our impact lands negatively is that absence of thought and consideration for other. So very cool. So, what are some, if you were to give anyone advice about getting into business with a partner, what would some of those things be?
The first thing is to assess, I think, whether or not you need a partner. I needed one because I knew that I needed another human to be part of what held me accountable to taking a lot of action and to actually trying something out. Without Eli, I would spend some days sleeping till 11 o'clock. I know myself well enough to know that I need a partner for the accountability piece. So the first thing is, can you do it alone or not? And the second thing is, I think, to repeat a little bit about what I said earlier, is if you can't be honest with your partner, it's the wrong partner.
Yep.
What do you think, Eli?
Yeah. I think that the honesty part is probably the biggest thing. And I would say as like a practical exercise to try, if you are contemplating partnering with a friend, I would say sit down with that person and have a conversation where the goal of the conversation is to tell the other person all of the reasons why you are worried about partnering with them, and vice versa. And see if you can have that conversation without either one of you getting defensive and instead listening and taking it on. And if you can do that, that's probably a good sign.
And we literally did that.
Yeah. The other thing that I think we learned a little bit after the fact, rather than an insight that we thought about before partnering together, is try not to necessarily partner with somebody who has different skills than you, but rather partner with somebody who is strengthened by different things than you. Because we have similar skill sets. Like we both are strong communicators, and we like to coach people and teach people and focus in the world of communication. Neither of us is a coder or a developer. We're both similarly financially inclined in terms of how we run our business. So it's not that we have necessarily complementary skill sets, but we're both very energized by different tasks. Yeah. And I think that's a more important thing than different skill sets. Find somebody who is energized by doing the activities that weaken you and who is weakened by the activities that energize you. Yeah. And that's a symbiotic balance that we have, I think, serendipitously fell into. But now that we've fallen into it, I would recommend try to look at the things that strengthen you or weaken you rather than the things you're good at or bad at.
Yeah, I think that's probably the best advice I've heard in a long time around how to complement or how to work with a partner or team member, which is, it's not always about looking for the opposite skill set for them to fulfill a need or a gap that you're not bringing, but it is about having those similar skill sets, but, different values maybe in some capacity or different ways about getting there or styles. That's brilliant. That's really fucking brilliant.
Yeah, we can't take all the credit for it. When we were starting our business, we went to a bunch of mentors, you being one of them, asking for advice on how we can do this thing. And Martin from Speaker Spotlight, the co-founder of Speaker Spotlight, talked to us about how we should stop looking at strengths and weaknesses and start looking at strengthening and weakening and what that does to you.
Which he partnered with his wife.
Yeah.
That's a whole other layer of...
They've been very
You and I don't need to share a bed, which is amazing.
Count my blessings every day.
You never know, guys. So, okay, cool. So what's next for you guys? Where do you guys go in the business? What's happening?
Good question.
Yeah. There's a lot of thinking on that. I don't know if we have a clear direction. We're toying with a bunch of different paths. I mean, part of what we want to do is not lose sight of what our core mission really is, which is we want to help people get better at public speaking. And in reality, what we want to help people do is get better at navigating their relationship with their own fear. And public speaking is a good lens through which to do that because it triggers fear so ubiquitously. So that's the core of what we want to always stay focused on. But in terms of ways that we want to grow or in terms of ways we want to evolve our business, we want to maybe bring on new trainers, but we're toying with that idea a lot and have zero commitment to actually doing it. We're toying with new mediums of delivering our ideas. We're toying with new content, new ideas to actually share. So there's a lot of different things. I don't know if we've sort of put a stake in the ground to say this is the path we're going to go yet, though. Yeah.
New trainers is interesting, man, because, obviously I'm in the business.
What's your take on that?
Look, it takes, I know what you guys do. What you guys do is very unique. It's special. I think besides the content being really strong, the experience that you create, the delivery and the way you do it, the energy, you just can't recreate that shit, right? And if you are going to bring on trainers, I think one of the things you got to really start to consider or think about is, how does this land for our brand? Right? There are good trainers out there. I mean, you can find the really good speakers. They could pick up content. They deliver it well as like a trainer. But I think we're living in the world, particularly the knowledge industry, which is about $1 billion a day right now and jumping to, I think, is it 7 or 8 billion a day in the next year or 2 years. People are craving knowledge. They're craving learning. And, I think for what you guys do and maybe for what we do as well, it doesn't take a regular trainer to do that. It takes a special person that is able to move people with the use of content, right, and tools. So the only thing I'd say is just be super, super, super selfish about who that is. And if you do onboard a trainer, I might suggest onboarding a junior trainer to help sort of with the more administrative, basic follow-up, maybe certain exercises in the room just to free you up.
I know you've struggled with it too, right? It's so hard, so hard. We meet amazing public speakers all the time because everyone public speaks in our course, and public speaking is a good criteria for being a good trainer, right? You need to, if you're a teacher, you need to be speaking and presenting, but we still are just super scared about expanding that in terms of number of trainers that we have. But I think we both sort of know that if not in 2020, at least at some point, it's going to be something that we got to consider or actually do.
Or from a scalability standpoint, maybe you're not offsetting, maybe you're not doing bringing on more trainers, but maybe it is more about you doing a different type of work. Maybe that costs increase, obviously. Support staff starts to come in. So the revenue model goes up. But that's because of the selectiveness in regard to what you offer. And then there's things like the other revenue models, online, et cetera, et cetera. Interesting conversation. You just said something. The greatest people I've ever worked with have come from the most immediate network that sits in front of me. So some of our best trainers have been students, people that were in class that you met, people that work for the company or people that have come from that network. So, you know, you just said that you meet great public speakers every single day. That's the place I would sort of maybe look to onboard talent instead of going out there and finding professional trainers that are really good with material. Right? So good. All right, awesome. So I want to ask you guys about some storytelling. All right, just selfishly for the audience, you know, the storytelling is a big thing now.
That sounds selfless, not selfish.
Well, maybe for me, I'm gonna get better at storytelling too. But you know, I've seen you run a model on how to craft your story and stuff. But start us at the beginning. You know, talk to us about, you know, what is a good story. You know, what makes someone a good storyteller. What could be some tips or things that, you know, people can use or think about when creating? Yeah.
I remember 10 years ago, I was sitting on my couch. I don't even have a story, but you probably want to hear where that story is going. That's why story works,
I'm
right?
like, where?
Right, exactly.
What happened on the couch?
Like, oh my God, what were you doing on the couch, right? Yeah. So that's the first thing, is that just humans like stories, right? If you go straight into context of a story, people are like, ooh, cool. Where's he going to go with this? Yeah. So that's the first realization we had about stories, just that humans like them. I mean, Eli's a master at creating them and making them feel valuable. But
that's far too high praise.
No, I think it's deserved. But I think that was the first thing, is we start with a foundational understanding of why story works. And there's this innate thing about stories that humans just like, that they want to hear. I remember watching a television show once where the host of the show was talking about like human origins. I think the show might actually be called Origins. Yeah, I think and one of them was on communication. And one of the things that he said was, maybe the most important thing that separates humans from other species is that through storytelling, humans have been able to communicate through time, which is incredible. So it's like, it's in us, it's coded in us that we just love stories, and it's one of our advantages in the animal kingdom.
Yeah, it comes back to tribalism. Like, hey, back in tribes,
Totally.
that's you know,
Totally.
you communicate through stories.
Yeah. So that's the first thing, is just it works because humans love them. So you better be good at them.
And it's what we realize is it's not just that humans love stories, it's that humans think in story. Yes. We process the world in narrative form. You can call it your inner monologue if you want, but human beings have a continuity to the way that we process information. And what that opened up for us is that storytelling isn't a skill that some people possess. It's the foundation of how human brains work. This is how all human beings are awesome at story. The difference is that some people are comfortable externalizing their stories. Other people keep them all internal in their inner monologue. And so once we had that insight, we realized that storytelling is probably way more accessible to way more people than we had originally anticipated, rather than sort of like a specific talent that some people have and other people don't.
Yeah, so it's not innate that people are good storytellers versus none.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure there's a gradient to it, and there's some people who are better than others, but on the binary scale, human beings are a 1 on the storytelling capacity. Okay. And so then we started to try to break down what makes a story. And what we realized is that there's really, really simple foundations to a story. A story is just a sequence of events. This happened, and this happened, and this happened. And so once we isolated that stories are really simple to create, what we tried to figure out is, how do you make stories strategic and relevant in the context of presentations? Because it's one thing to sit around the table with a bunch of friends having coffee or beer or something and tell a story about what happened this past weekend. It's another thing to get up in front of a group of people, an audience, in a high-stakes public speaking context and leverage the effectiveness of story in order to make a point land more effectively. And so when we started to try to think about how this concept of story applies to making a point in a presentation, One of the things we started noticing is that most people try to come up with a good story and then figure out what points it can make. When in reality, you've got to come up with a really poignant, simple, clear point that you want to get across to people meaningfully before you start coming up with a story. That's one of the biggest insights that we had. First, you've got to come up with a clear point and then move to coming up with a story. And the point ends up being the guidepost that directs the type of story you create. So that's the first sort of step in the process. Get crystal clear on a point you want to create. If we were to give any advice, don't tell a story until you have a clear point. That's like the first step. The second step, once you have a clear point, is you've got to come up with a story to tell. And we always tell people, try to come up with stories from your own personal life. And the way that we do that is we try to look at our brains, our life experiences that in our mind, it's just like our brain is filled with all of the experiences of our life. What we try to do is we try to look at our brains like a database, and we try to Google our brains for a story that can help us make a point. So if I wanted to make the point, failure is okay. That's an important point to make if you're a leader.
Yeah.
Right? And
or a presenter or storyteller or public speaker.
Yeah. I mean, a leader getting up in front of their team to public speak and share something about how their business is doing, it's a really important message to say we aren't doing everything well, but that's okay. We can be doing things better. We have to learn from it. Failure is okay. So if I wanted to make a point like that, or if a speaker wanted to make a point like that, once they got crystal clear on the message they wanted to get across being failure is okay, you've just got to learn and move forward, then I'd go and I'd say, let's Google your brain. What's a time in your life where you failed at something? And usually people start to try to think of the most extravagant failures from their life. And we try to get people to recognize that you don't need extravagant life experiences. I remember we once had someone say to us, I love this storytelling thing. This is so cool. I'm really excited about it. I just don't think I can be a good storyteller. We were like, that's interesting. Why? And the guy goes, I've never had a near-death experience.
Oh, wow.
And we're like, come on, as though that's a logical line of thinking. You can't be a good storyteller because you haven't had a near-death experience.
Yeah, because people hear these motivational speakers that had to climb the mountain and got stuck at the top and then, had to rappel down and, had to do it barefoot and almost lost 3 toes but lived, right? Yeah. So, we have another guy that also had a tragic story on safari and ended up losing his arm, and yes, he is a speaker and an author and stuff like that, but that's where people's brain goes. They think I've got to have this near-death crazy life experience.
And it's not that they're wrong.
Yeah.
Near-death, those are awesome stories, right? If you think about like 2 of the best television shows ever, in my opinion, let's be clear. Lost, where there is crazy shit happening every single week, and Seinfeld, where nothing happens at all. Therefore, good storytelling can be crazy shit or normal shit. And that's a really important realization for people to have.
Yeah. Seinfeld's a really good analogy or example of, a show about nothing has great stories.
If you do it right, if you tell the story right, it doesn't need to be the time you were hanging on the edge of a cliff.
Yeah. And truthfully, I never found Seinfeld funny. Like him, like Jerry Seinfeld personally, but the show was funny. Right. So really, that's interesting. All right, cool. So he didn't have a near-death experience.
Right.
So what'd you say to him?
So we said, what's a time where you failed at something, that was another person. But if I was speaking to someone who wanted to make a point about failure, I'd say, what's a time where you failed at something? And, if you forgot to take your garbage bin out on garbage day, and then you realize, oh crap, I forgot to take it out, that's a failure. You can tell that story as a time where you failed at something, and then you realize, I'll take the garbage out next week. Failure isn't always as bad as we think. Yeah. And once we get people to come up with simple life experiences that are relevant to the point that they've come up with, then we move to how do you craft that story effectively, because that's the most important piece. A masterpiece of a story told like crap is crap, but a crappy story told brilliantly is now a masterpiece. So we tell people that the way to craft a story is very simple. Tell us the sequence of events. Tell us what happened. This happened, then this happened, then this happened. But that's only half the battle. The other half of the battle is you have to tell us your experience of what happened. It's one thing to say, I had intended to take the garbage out. I didn't take the garbage out, and it sucked. It's another thing to say, I had intended to take the garbage out, and I didn't take the garbage out. And when I realized that I had forgotten to take the garbage out, I felt like a complete idiot. I felt so stupid. It's in that second part, your internal monologue expressed, that people start to relate to you. And part of what story does is it allows human beings to connect at an emotional level. And so telling us just what happened without telling us about your feelings around what happened, that's an ineffective way to craft a story. So we tell people, tell us what happened and tell us how you felt. And that's the key.
Really smart. I had a client/friend call me a couple hours ago, send me a text message saying, about to stand up in front of all the leaders to give my presentation. Give me an inspiring line to open up with, right? So I said, fuck them all. But I got caught. I was like, I don't know what to answer. I was like, I've never opened up a speech with an inspiring line, right? And the sort of, I fudged my way through some advice, which was, hey, be yourself, like you're a rock star. I think I said just tell a story about what happened this year and then sort of attach it to, you know, what a crazy year kind of thing. So we'll see. Maybe they're listening to this later and they'll let us know. They'll add a comment being like, yeah, the story kicked ass or no. Yeah. So cool. So big mistakes people make when trying to craft stories or when delivering stories, telling stories?
I think the biggest mistake people make is not having a story that concludes. You need to have either a punchline or a lesson or your story sucks. The worst storyteller I know is my mom. She is the greatest mom of all time. I love her so much. I love her so much. Mom, I know you're going to listen because you told me before I came here that you wanted me to send you the finished podcast. I love you so much, but such a bad storyteller. And the reason is not the first half of the story. The first half of the story she's great at, and then it just abruptly ends. And we're like, why'd you tell me that? Yeah. Well,
where are we going?
You're craving more, yeah. Right? So
kind of feels like the last episode of Lost.
Right, exactly. So that's one of the biggest things. Yeah. If your story does not have either a punchline or a lesson to be learned, then your story sucks. So you need to have a point. I would say that's the biggest failure on that I've seen. How about you?
They sort of just drone on.
Yeah. I would say one other trap that people fall into is not being specific enough. And there are many types of stories. You can tell stories that happen over the span of decades in your life. But we find if we're going to get as simple as possible, the best story is a singular specific experience. Because if I wanted to, let's say I wanted to talk to you about how skiing is equal parts psychology and skill. I can say I've been skiing for the better part of 2.5 decades. And every time I ski, what I've come to learn is that skiing is as much psychology as it is skill. And I can talk about the macro of my experiences in narrative form. Or I can get really specific. And I can say, in 2006, I went on a ski trip to Jackson Hole, Wyoming. And right with that specificity, audiences jump into the narrative. They project themselves into the narrative. Yeah. And I was on this ski trip in Jackson Hole. And I was there with my family and a bunch of friends. And there's a run in Jackson Hole called Corbett's Couloir. And it's famous because it has basically a 90-degree vertical. And I had done a lot of skiing up until this point in my life. And I was pretty confident that there's not much terrain that I couldn't ski. And so I was really excited that I was going to go see Corbett's Couloir and I was going to ski Corbett's Couloir and I was going to do this run. And then we got to the top of the mountain and I saw like crowds standing around and there was like one person every 10 minutes going and dropping into Corbett's Couloir. And so I watched a couple of people go and my heart started pounding and I started getting really anxious, not just of skiing, but of all the people watching. Like, what if I screwed up? Even though these were all strangers, I started feeling very self-conscious. And eventually I didn't ski the run. And I left Jackson Hole, Wyoming, having not skied Corbett's Couloir. And I don't think I was lacking the skills. It was in that particular moment at the top of Corbett's Couloir. I stood at the top. My skis were like off the edge. And it was in that moment that I realized that skiing is equal parts skill and psychology. And the point lands differently in the context of that specific narrative.
For two reasons, the specificity and the punchline. Had he just said, and I didn't ski the run, you're left thinking, okay, and he had to come to that point at the end, which is, and that's when I realized it's equal parts skill and psychology. Yeah. So vivid and specific and come to a point.
And it's not to say that you need vivid and specific stories. You can tell great stories that are more generic. But in general, we find, especially for people who are starting to build their story chops, we would say try to go for more specificity at the beginning.
And I'm assuming you also sort of try to recommend or advise people to sort of build that story bank. Which
totally.
We literally have one. It's a Google Doc. We call it the story bank.
Yeah, it's called the story bank.
Yeah.
Cool. Right, that you just sort of draw upon or call upon in your different keynotes or presentations. Very cool. Very cool. So here's a big question. What do you think's changed for speakers? and maybe it's a loaded question, and I'll sort of make it a little more specific. In today's world, we are seeing more and more and more thought leaders, speakers, coaches, people putting up there. Maybe not what has changed, but maybe a general sort of question. What do you think of speakers today? I mean, are there good ones out there? Are the majority of them shits? What do you look for in a good speaker or good presenter?
I think it's both. There are good ones and some are shit. To me, the best speakers are speakers who realize that it's equal parts value and entertainment. If you only have the value but you're not entertaining, well, then they're not listening to you. So the value is irrelevant because they didn't hear you. And if you're only entertaining but not valuable, well, then they're going to realize at some point that you're just a dog and pony show. If you can be 100% of both, you're the best speaker in the business. I think usually the bad speakers for getting at least one of those two things. The speakers who do both are the best. What do you think?
I agree. I think there are some speakers who are awesome and some who are not. I think the best speakers tend to be good storytellers. Brene Brown comes to mind as like a truly brilliant communicator. Yeah. And I just listened to her on a podcast yesterday, and she probably told 15 stories in the span of 40 minutes. Yep. It's crazy. She's like so story oriented. But the other thing I find about her and other really effective public speakers is that it's sort of like what you see is what you get. It seems like authenticity and vulnerability are currency in communication today.
1,000%.
Yeah, and I think the best public speakers that I find are people who, when you watch them communicate at scale, public speaking, you see a version of them that might be slightly expanded because the context calls for it, but you see a version of them on stage that is basically identical to what you would expect them to be off stage. Yeah. And that's true of Brene Brown, that's true of Oprah, that's true of Barack Obama. Some of the best public speakers tend to have congruency with who they are on stage and off stage.
Who are some other great speakers in your mind? So besides those three?
One of my favorite speakers is Jim Carrey. I think that stand-up comedy and public speaking are really interesting. They're like cousins, right? Sure. One is for business purpose, one is for entertainment purpose. But, I mean, you watch Jim Carrey either present or accept awards at an award show, and you just can't take your eyes off of him. He's just so brilliant. So that's another one that we haven't mentioned. We haven't really spoken about any stand-up comics, but...
Neil deGrasse Tyson comes to mind.
Okay. Unbelievable.
He's fantastic in so many different ways. I mean, Eric and I always try to simplify into like categories of things that make people effective. And he's really great for a lot of the core things. He's a good storyteller. He's very captivating. He has depth of value. He has entertainment. But one of the things that I think makes him so special as a communicator is that he takes insanely complicated and intricate ideas and simplifies them well. And I think it was like an Einstein quote or something about how...
Yeah, if you can't explain something simply enough, you don't understand it
exactly.
deeply enough or great enough, right?
Yeah, and I think he's one of those people who he understands things deeply enough or greatly enough that he can make them really simple.
Plus, he speaks deeply enough.
Yes.
It's just so good.
He's got that radio voice.
Oh my God.
Right? Very cool. Yeah. Very, very, very cool.
Another one, just to double down on the authenticity piece. I was watching Howard Stern last night interview.
Is he still around?
He is still around. Wow. Totally. Yeah, he's still crushing it more than ever. And he was talking to Bill Maher about how he's still around. Yeah. That was one of the topics they were covering. And I was watching him interact with Bill Maher, and I'm thinking, like, on paper, every single thing you're doing is off-putting. He keeps touching him, and he keeps being like very, very intense and overbearing. And so on paper, everything you're doing is horrible. But you're so likable, and it's because it's just palpable that you're being you. You're just being so authentic that it's impossible to hold it against you because the authenticity is palpable. So that's the other thing too. If you're trying to be someone you're not, people aren't going to like you. But even if you're things people don't like, but people can tell it's real, it's like, all right.
So authenticity, big topic, and you brought up vulnerability, and since they've popped up, let's kind of go there for a sec. How easy is it for people to be authentic in today's world?
I'd say very hard.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah. I grapple with that myself. Like I'm always in my mind constantly questioning if what I'm representing is 100% congruent with what's happening internal. And I think there's always going to be a disconnect, even for the most authentic, and I say that in air quotes, most authentic people on the planet. There's there is always, in my opinion, some amount of dilution between what exists in our minds, in our inner monologues, versus what is expressed externally. There's always some amount of dilution. The question is how much.
Right. I mean, literally, I don't know about the two of you, but I'm literally grappling with it right now. I see the microphone, I see the camera, and I'm grappling with my own authenticity right now. Obviously, I want to sound smart. I want to be entertaining. I want to do all these things.
I want you to know you are smart. You are entertaining. You're funny. And
but I'm also trying to be authentic.
As long as you're your good-looking self, you'll be authentic.
Thank you very much.
But no, I hear your point.
You know what I mean? Like I'm
yeah.
grappling. I literally teach people communication, and I'm grappling with my own fears around authenticity right now.
Yeah.
So
I think authenticity is borderline impossible because human beings possess theory of mind, where we can go, what am I thinking? We can go, what are you thinking? What are you thinking that I'm thinking? And we can keep going down that route. What are you thinking that I'm thinking about him? Yeah. Right? And there's this constant interplay of us trying to assess what other people around us are thinking. And given the inherent inaccuracy of that process, there's going to be this I think you think this about me, but I think this about me. And there's always going to be these disconnects that are going to culminate in inauthenticity. So I think it's a very hard thing to answer your question. Is how easy is authenticity? It's incredibly hard, but it's a worthy pursuit. Constantly try to figure out more about who you are. And once you get clear on who you are, try to represent that.
And I think there's a practice element too. I mean, for you, do you find you're more comfortable on this podcast than you were on your first? And so you probably don't have to think much about your authenticity right now, but you probably did 7 episodes ago, you know?
Yeah, I actually have to worry. I have the opposite worry, which is I'm sometimes a little too raw and uncensored and cursed. So, but that's to your point, dialing that back down a little bit because you want to be palatable or you want to be accepted or you want to be, received. So, yeah, but to answer your question, or to add to what you said, I think there's always going to be that small variance or disconnect. But if we can close that gap, I think that's the secret sauce there, which is we'll never always be 100% authentic because of everything you just described. But, maybe we can get to like 98%.
Yeah. And I think it's contextual too. Like I think sometimes people make a blanket statement about themselves where they say, I'm so bad at being myself. I'm so bad at being authentic. When in reality, they may be bad at being authentic in some circumstances. Some people in a certain friend group struggle to be themselves, but in another friend group, they open up and their true colors show. And so just recognizing that authenticity might be circumstance-based or contextual is an important thing to note also.
Yeah, I agree. So the second piece was vulnerability. Brene Brown talks about it. We also know the work around vulnerability and its direct relationship with empathy. So in the world that we live of social media, of storytelling, of being on, of sales, how many people do you meet in your business that are coming through your coaching and training are able to be vulnerable? Because you would think in your environment, like you're teaching people, they're here to storytell, publicly speak, it's a fear of theirs. You just might get people sort of opening up and being vulnerable, or do you not?
I think we do.
We do. We don't all the time, but we do. Just this week, we had someone tell a very emotional story, and she started crying in front of everyone, in front of the whole room. Everyone gets a chance to present in our course, and she got up there, and she started crying, and it was real, and she almost didn't get through it, but she pushed through it. It was amazing to watch, but certainly not everyone in that group did it. So, I think that one of the reasons people aren't vulnerable is because they're scared about being judged for it. But reality is very different than that. Reality is the person who cried in that group was the most liked person in that group, but everyone else was too scared to do it. So you're again, back to fears. Your fears tell you something much different than reality. Everyone was scared to cry, but the one who actually did it was the one who got the most love.
Yeah, and probably didn't do it because she intended to cry, but was willing to go there. And, I think to that, really brave to be able to share those stories, right? I think we live in this world of connection and as much as we live in this world of connection because of technology, because of like the pace that we're operating at, because of like, in some cases, our own independent needs, we don't actually give ourselves opportunity to connect. And it's vulnerability that is the one thing that allows us to connect with another human being the most, right? That lean in. And we know this, and you'll know this, that, you know, the majority of audience is going to empathize with you and want you to win, not be sitting in the audience being, look at this fucker, get them off stage, right? I mean, most people in the audience are going to be like, you know, oh, wow, like I empathize with that person's crying, or, oh my gosh, I feel so bad for them. And we saw, you might even find you do this. I do this with speakers where I like start nodding my head and I'm trying to physically look like I'm into it to sort of build them up a little bit. So
that's one of the biggest realizations we try to give people, is that your audience is rooting for you.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you've ever been in an audience yourself, you, anyone listening, you know that if you are watching a presenter have a panic attack, their slides stop working, or they're completely shit in the bed, you're not rooting for them to fail. You're dying for them to get it back on track, right? The secondhand embarrassment that you feel for them is so strong that you're dying for them to succeed. Audiences are always on your side, but everyone thinks audiences are out to get them.
Yeah, and it's not the case.
No.
Just off the topic, we've just finished sort of talking about authenticity and vulnerability, and we're living in this world of TED Talks now. Right, where, you know, as one associate just said, you know, everyone and their mother has a TED Talk right now. What is your thought on this whole world of TED Talks, and where do you think we're going with this? Are you guys going to do a TED Talk? Maybe. You should.
We're not in any discussions with TED to do one, but that would be a pretty cool opportunity.
I have mixed opinions about it. I think one thing that I find about TED Talks is that they've become a little bit prescriptive, in that, I mean, pick a random TED Talk, watch it. There's a very high likelihood that the speaker is going to start with some personal anecdote that they then parlay into a key insight. And I mean, that is a good way to public speak. That's a good use of storytelling. But at the same time, too much of anything becomes mundane. And so I think that maybe there should be a little bit less rigidity in the way that TED enforces their own talks, but also in the way that they enforce TEDx extensions. Yeah. So I think they're probably going to reach a tipping point where people start taking the ideas in less interestedly, because of the format in which it's delivered being so like narrow.
Yeah, and I'm not, and I see that not just happening on TED Talks, but people in general. Everyone that feels they've had some infliction, right, have some personal antidote to share with the world, because which has led them to some key insights, and they're now going to come and, you know, share this. So. Yeah, that was a really good point. And I think what you said there, and if you've had any experience with TED, there is a very prescribed way that you want to structure your speech, right? Which is that personal antidote into an insight, into sort of, you know, the capstone. Thank you very much. Yeah, prescribed thought. I like what you said there. Yeah.
They prescribe how you deliver. They literally don't let you walk outside that red circle. So they prescribe it in so many ways. I think with it, you're already seeing TED Talks getting made fun of a little bit. I'm a big Twitter guy. I'm always on Twitter. It's my #1 app on my phone. I don't even want to look at the screen time. But you see tweets sometimes of people making fun of them. Someone will tweet something like, hey, people at ATMs take too long. Go faster. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. There's always a thank you for coming to my TED Talk punchline. Not always, but it's happening, right? So people are already making fun of them. But I think people love to learn. Even people who don't consider themselves as learning lovers, they are. And it just is, there's certain topics they like learning more than others. My brother doesn't like learning, he says, because he doesn't like math. Well, I've never met someone who loves learning about movies more than him. Everyone loves to learn, and TED Talks are about learning. So I don't think the desire to learn is going to change, but I think maybe the formats.
Yeah. Well, you're seeing Mind Valley now. Do you know what Mind Valley is?
I see a bunch of ads for them on YouTube.
So this guy Vishen started it. Anyway, it's an organization that its purpose is to create learning opportunities, experiences, globally, and online, and conferences and all this stuff. And, you know, they've got topics, everything from meditation to storytelling to, you know, leadership to you name it. And it's out there. And to your point, people crave to learn. And yeah, there's a lot of different formats out there. So with that, I mean, what what would be some sort of takeaways you want people to take away from what you do? So if you were to give anyone tips for next year, 2020, you're going to be storytelling, you're going to be presenting, you're going to start a business, you're going to, work with a partner. And I know we've shared it all, but, closing thoughts, things that you want maybe people to walk away with for next year.
I would say fear is a guidepost. Fear evolved into human beings to protect us. It serves a good purpose. Fear is trying to help you. It's just that your fear is a little bit narrow-minded and it doesn't see the world objectively. And so when your fear pops up, that likely means it's trying to protect you from something. But there's a very high likelihood that what it's trying to protect you from isn't actually a threat. Or if it is a threat or if there's risk to it, the probability of those risks actualizing in a way that causes real harm is very low. And so when you find yourself experiencing fear, use it as a guidepost and move in that direction. Whether it's in a big, bold step or some small action, use fear as a guidepost, and that's probably going to help you experience some cool things in life.
That's very cool.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Two things for me. One is radical honesty, especially with the people you need to work with. The second one is there's this phenomenon that happens. Have you ever been skydiving?
No.
I never have either, but I know what people say who go skydiving.
But I want to go.
I have been skydiving.
So you have been skydiving. So you know this to be true because everyone I've spoken to about skydiving says when they're about to jump out of the plane, they would rather be anywhere else in the world. Scariest thing of all time.
I wanted to go back down.
Right. How can I get out of this? And then they land, and the first thing they say is, I want to go again.
I almost spent $300 to do it again.
Right. See? And you're not unique. That's what everyone says.
Yes.
And that's a really good case study. And when you do something you're afraid of, sometimes it becomes the thing you get addicted to and the thing you love the most. Yeah. So do that thing that you're worried is going to make you look like an idiot or that you're worried is going to be something that doesn't go so well. And what you might find is that was really awesome. And I really got a lot of growth from that. I think that applies with public speaking, but it applies in so many other areas too.
Awesome. So tell us where we could find you. Speakerlabs.ca.
Speakerlabs.ca.
What are your handles?
We don't have any handles. We're the biggest social idiots of all time. We don't have the social media game down, but we're really good at responding to emails. Right. So if you send us one, Eric@speakerlabs.ca or Eli@speakerlabs.ca, we'll definitely get back to you there.
And we'll definitely post that all in the captioning and stuff like that. So listen, guys, I'm really glad you came here. As mentioned, I started out by saying I've wanted to interview you guys for a while. Love what you guys do. I think you're probably the best out there that I've seen in a long time. So this was fruitful and really appreciate the time to come by, and hopefully we could have you come back.
Thank you. This was awesome.
Awesome.
Ton of fun.
Awesome. So
had a lot of fun.
Cheers. We will see you next time.